My name's Danny English. I'm a children's author and storyteller, and recently I've been working with the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust to bring you some new tales from the Yorkshire Dales. And this story that I'm going to tell you is called The Falcon and the Giant's Heart. Now, whenever you come to the Yorkshire Dales, we are always mesmerised by the landscape here. We have great scars and caves and U-shaped valleys and limestone pavements. But it's not always been like that. We are told in our schools of the way that these landscapes were formed, how they were carved out by nature's natural systems and affected by climate change and humans. But there is one story that they don't tell you, and that is the story of the great giant of the north. You see, a long time ago, the Yorkshire Dales was covered with thick forest. As far as you could see, there were beautiful trees. And the land was very flat and much higher than we know today. It was a great place for people and animals to live. But the whole world wasn't like that. Down in the deep southern Isles, there was a great heat storm that had bubbled up from the ground. It was destroying everything it could. Animals were struggling to survive as there was little water and no food. So some of the great birds came together and they told of a tale of a great giant in the north, a giant who had helped them in the past to cool their lands. Some of the birds remembered, and they decided that one of them should fly and ask the giant for help once again. So it was decided that the fastest of all creatures, the peregrine falcon, would fly to the far north and ask the great giant for help. So the peregrine falcon readied itself. It flew north over the lands and the seas. And when it arrived in the great north, it began to look for the giant. The whole place was white. But the peregrine falcon noticed long, thick rivers cutting through the land. The falcon followed these long, black, thick rivers until they came to a huge hill. And that hill was the giant's head. You see, the long, thick rivers weren't rivers at all. They were the big, long strands of the giant's hair. And the falcon flew down and landed on the tip of the giant's nose, and the giant awoke. And the falcon told the giant of the trouble down in the southern lands and asked the giant to help. And this giant was very kind and very brave. And without hesitation, he jumped to his feet, shaking the land around him. He agreed to help. He said he would drag the ice down into the southern lands, and there the ice would cool the creatures and cool the soils and fill the streams. So they looked far and wide for something to shackle the ice with, but nothing could be found. And the giant said to the falcon, "May I use your beak?" And he took the falcon in between his finger and thumb. He began to cut away his hair using the falcon's beak. And then he plaited his hair nice and tightly, and he shackled the ice, and he began to pull. And he pulled and heaved and hauled the ice, and the ice began to slide, and slowly they began to head south, the falcon leading the way, singing songs as it went, and the giant heaving and hauling and pulling behind. This went on, and the giant became exhausted, and after a number of weeks it pleaded with the falcon, "Can we stop? Can we rest?" But the falcon insisted that they should go on, worried for all of its kin down in the southern lands. So on they went. But little did they know that it wasn't just the giant that was becoming worn. The hair that shackled the ice was becoming worn too. It was breaking. It was becoming more and more fragile. And with another heave and another haul, the hair snapped. And as it snapped, the giant went tumbling forwards. And as he tumbled, he flattened all of the forests. He tumbled some more, his arms scraping the rocks away, and some of the valleys were formed. He tumbled some more, and the limestone pavements appeared. And when he came to settle, he lay on his back and he looked up. He saw two giant mountains with pointy peaks. He put his hand on one and his hand on the other, and he hauled himself up. But as he did, the tops of the mountains broke off in his hands, leaving two big flat top hills, and they are the hills that we know today as Ingleborough and Pennygent. And the giant looked around at the devastation, and he couldn't believe what he had done. He pleaded again with the falcon, "Let us rest, let us rest." And the falcon this time agreed. And the giant lay down, and the falcon landed on his shoulder, and together they fell asleep. And they weren't sure how long they had slept for, but when they woke to the most beautiful scene they had ever seen. The giant wiped his eyes and looked around. The new landscape that had been made was utterly beautiful. The ice behind him was beginning to melt, and new rivers and streams and waterfalls cascaded from the rocks. A rainbow opened up behind, and even though the land was bare, there was something very, very beautiful about it. This giant had never known love before, but in that moment, he fell in love with the land. Tears of joy began to pour down his face, off his chest and onto the ground, and they began to run away. The tears were so salty that it is said that on that day, the great Goredale scar was created by the giant's tears. Now, from up on the cliffs, the falcon was watching. He could see what was happening and the love that the giant had for this place, but he knew they must continue. He told the giant, "It is time to go." But the giant didn't want to leave. He pleaded and pleaded to stay, but the falcon insisted they must go on. They got the hair and they repaired the plait, and once again they tied it to the ice, and onward they went. But as they went onward, the giant felt himself getting sadder and sadder. The falcon noticed this and asked the giant, "Why all the sadness?" And the giant said, "I am feeling heavier and heavier with each step. And even though I am feeling heavier, part of me thinks that I have left something behind." So without hesitation, the falcon spun and flew back. And it looked far and wide for something that the giant may have left, but nothing could be found. But while it was looking, the falcon felt something in its chest, a pulling on its heart, a needing to stay. The falcon didn't like this. It knew that it must go, so it turned and it flew away, and together they went onwards until finally they reached the southern lands. The other birds were so pleased to see the giant and the falcon. The ice was delivered. It began to melt. The rivers and the streams and the lakes began to fill. The sandy earth turned green again. There was food and water. All the animals had been saved. The giant was utterly exhausted. It lay and fell asleep. And the falcon flew around and it landed down by the giant and it woke it. And it told the giant of its trip back and the pulling on its heart. And the giant nodded. And the giant said, I know what I left behind in that place. I left a piece of my heart. And I'm afraid I may never see it again. And with that, the giant closed its eyes. And the falcon flew. And the falcon thought the least it could do to repay the giant and to thank it was to go and find its heart. So it called all of the birds together and it told that the giant's heart was still in the Yorkshire Dales. The robin said, I will go. I will go and find the giant's heart to say thank you. So the robin set off and it flew and flew and flew, but eventually it came back exhausted without the heart. The robin explained that when it had arrived in the Yorkshire Dales, there were no trees for it to rest. So it had to come back without the heart. So the blackbird agreed to go. But it returned with the same fate. No trees meant no rest. So the starling went, but the same again. And the sparrow went. But each time the birds returned with the same story. There are no trees. We cannot rest, so we cannot search. So the falcon went to tell the giant of this. But when it arrived at the sleeping place of the giant was gone. The falcon thought it must have returned, so it turned and it flew back towards the Yorkshire Dales. But no giant. But when it arrived there, it realised that it didn't need trees to rest, for the falcon can rest on the cliff tops. And the falcon decided that day that it would remain in the Yorkshire Dales until the giant's heart could be found. And what happened of the giant? Well, we're not entirely sure, but it is said that the giant heard of the trouble with the trees and set off across the lands in search of new saplings and new seeds to plant here in the Yorkshire Dales, so that more trees could be planted and more birds could return. Now you may be thinking that there are some trees in the Yorkshire Dales, and that is true. You see, since this story happened, more and more trees have grown and more birds have returned. You may find yourself off on a walk in one of the woodlands in the Yorkshire Dales, and you may see a robin or a blackbird turning over the leaves or hopping between rocks or jumping between branches. You may wonder why they are so busy, but I'll tell you, all of the birds that are busy in the Yorkshire Dales are doing one thing, and that is searching for the giant's heart. So the next time you're out on a walk, see if you can find it too. Follow the birds, for they may lead you to certain clues. And if you ever get a chance to plant a tree in the Yorkshire Dales, grab it with both hands. Because when you plant a tree with your hands, it means there is a greater chance of us finding the giant's heart.